Alice Preston had long since stopped trying to explain what happened to her when she slept. By day, she was a detective, one of the most respected in the Major Crimes Division of Howcroft City PD. 10 years on the force, 4 commendations, 3 closed homicide cases that no one else could solve, and 1 reputation that followed her like a shadow. She just knows. It wasn't something she could argue against. Not anymore. Her colleagues whispered it behind her back, often with a tone of reverence, sometimes fear. A few of them outright avoided her when a particularly difficult case hit the board, as though whatever allowed her to see what others couldn't might be contagious. She didn't blame them. After all, Alice wasn't sure she'd believe herself either. Her dreams had started changing years ago, after the birth of her son, Ethan. Back then, the visions had come rarely. Fractured moments of streets she didn't know, faces she'd never seen, voices speaking in a language that wasn't her own. Sometimes they would line up with a case. Other times, they were just noise. It took her years to understand the pattern, to see that what she experienced wasn't truly a vision. It was something stranger. When Alice dreamt, she slipped into the past. Not her own, not entirely, but moments already lived by others. Moments that had left echoes too strong to fade. Through some force she couldn't name, she became a witness, unseen, tethered to the minds of those who had been there. And sometimes, when the dream deepened, she could drift between them. A man's eyes one moment, a woman's the next, a child's the moment after. No control, no warning. For most of her career, she had hidden this from her peers. Not out of shame, but because the truth was too heavy for most to hold. Only her captain, an old friend who had known Alice since their academy days, suspected something. And perhaps that was why, on the rainy Thursday morning when the call came in, it was Alice's number that Captain Ramirez dialed first. The voice on the phone was clipped, urgent. Alice, missing child, 8-year-old girl, Jessica Harper, taken from her bedroom sometime last night. No signs of forced entry. Mother found her gone this morning. Possible abduction. No solid leads yet. I want you on this. She didn't hesitate. Within the hour, Alice stood outside the Harper residence, a narrow 3-story brick building on the city's east side, wedged between a shuttered laundromat and a pawn shop. The neighborhood had seen better decades. The rain had eased to a dull drizzle, coating everything in a film of gray that made the world feel two-dimensional. Crime scene tape fluttered lazily at the edges of the front stoop, watched by a pair of uniformed officers who nodded somberly as Alice passed. Inside, the air was stale with grief. Jessica's mother, Elaine Harper, sat on the couch, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. Eyes rimmed with red voice, hoarse from hours of crying. Alice spoke to her gently, taking notes, asking the questions that had to be asked. Routine. Clinical, even though her gut already told her this was no ordinary case. No forced entry, no alarms tripped, no sign of struggle. Jessica had gone to bed around 9, according to Elaine. She had checked on her daughter once before midnight, all normal. By morning, the girl was gone. The window in her room was slightly ajar, but the latch had been undamaged, and no prints were found. The only thing left behind was the faint scent of something metallic in the air, barely noticeable but wrong enough to make Alice pause. After canvassing the scene, she stepped into Jessica's bedroom alone, letting the door close behind her. The room was tidy, a child's space frozen in time. Posters of cartoon characters, stacks of picture books, a desk scattered with crayons and unfinished drawings. The bed covers were pulled back. A doll lay face down on the floor. Alice let out a slow breath. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from the pulse of something familiar. The kind of vibration that rose at the base of her skull when a dream was coming for her. The connection wasn't voluntary. It never was. But the proximity, the rawness of the scene. She knew tonight it would come. As she drove home that evening, the city unfolded around her in streaks of sodium light and wet asphalt. 1,000 lives moved through the streets, unaware that one of their own hung in a liminal space between life and death. Alice gripped the wheel tighter. For Ethan's sake, she didn't want this gift, not anymore. But for Jessica Harper, for her terrified mother, she would use it again, one more time. That night, after checking on Ethan, after locking the house, after sitting in the dark kitchen for long minutes with nothing but her own breath for company, she finally gave in to the exhaustion and let sleep take her. And when the dream came, it came hard. She wasn't herself. The first moment hit like a surge of ice through her veins. Her eyes, not her own, blinked into focus. She was standing on a sidewalk, slick with rain, facing the Harper house. No voice guided her. No face appeared. Someone who had crossed the threshold not long ago. Alice took an unsteady breath. The figure she occupied began to move, footsteps soft against the wet concrete, shadowed under a hood. Her heart, or the heart of this vessel, beat with unnatural calm. This was routine, practiced. The door opened without resistance. No lock had been forced. A key had been used, and that was when the first word reached her, whispered from somewhere deep inside the host's mind. A word wrapped in ritual, chanted with reverence, offering. The cold of the rain-soaked street seeped into her bones. though Alice knew it wasn't her own body that shivered. Her awareness drifted, anchored to the movements of the figure whose memories she now inhabited. In this dream space, her sense of self was thin, fragile, a thin thread connecting her to reality, easily frayed. She had learned long ago that resisting the flow would only snap the connection and leave her adrift in a void of shadows. The only way forward was to follow the path set before her. The figure moved with deliberate grace, crossing the threshold of the Harper house. The front door unlocked smoothly with a small brass key, one that fit perfectly into the old tumblers. There had been no sign of forced entry, and now Alice understood why. This person had prepared for this night. The entry was silent, practiced. Inside, the house was dark. Only the faint amber glow of a street lamp filtered through the curtains. The figure's breath was steady, controlled. No fear, no hesitation. Whoever this was, they had done this before. The whisper echoed again, not aloud, but within the host's mind, offering. The word pulsed with meaning, layered with reverence and expectation. This was no random abduction. It was ritual. The figure ascended the staircase, steps soft, as though knowing exactly which boards would creak and which would not. Alice absorbed every detail. The height of the steps, the rhythm of the movement, the faint chemical scent that clung to the figure's clothes. Something metallic, bitter, tinged with incense. The hallway stretched before them, shadows deepening near the child's bedroom door. A hand reached out, clad in a thin black glove, fingers long and deliberate. The doorknob turned without resistance. The latch had been oiled, planned. Jessica Harper lay asleep beneath a pastel blanket, her face soft and peaceful in the dim light. The figure stood in the doorway for several long seconds, watching her, almost as if savoring the moment. Then the voice again, now louder, resonant. She is chosen. Alice felt a surge of nausea. She struggled to maintain her tether to the dream, the cold certainty of what was unfolding, pressing hard against her mind. But before she could gather herself, the perspective shifted. Without warning, her consciousness jolted free from the first host and snapped into another, a deeper, heavier presence. A new body, standing not in the Harper house, but in a wide, dimly lit room of stone and brick. The air here was thick with smoke and old blood. Candlelight flickered across strange symbols etched into the floor. A gathering place, Tanctum. Around her, robed figures moved in practiced rhythm, preparing the space. The language they murmured was old, guttural, the cadence strange and broken. Alice could feel the pulse of power in the words, a rhythm older than logic or language. It was not performance, it was belief. On a raised platform at the far end of the room stood a tall figure, face hidden behind a wooden mask carved with hollow eyes and a jagged mouth. In their hands, a ceremonial blade glinted in the candlelight, its edge stained dark. Then the host spoke, not aloud, but from within, and Alice heard the thought clearly. Soon, the vessel will arrive. The offering must be prepared. Her vision blurred. The room tilted. Another shift. Suddenly, she was outside again, but not far. A nondescript van rattled through the city's wet streets, headlights slicing through the dark. Alice now rode as a passenger in the mind of the driver, a gaunt man with shaking hands and a raw, burning sense of purpose. On the seat beside him, a folded robe and a small wooden box bound with leather straps. The van turned sharply, heading toward the industrial district. Abandoned warehouses, forgotten buildings, the perfect place for shadows to gather unseen. In the passenger's mind, a single thought repeated with agonizing clarity. Tonight, we bring her to the circle. Tonight, the old words will be fulfilled. The dream pulsed again, the thread pulling tighter. Alice could feel herself being drawn deeper into the web of connected minds. Each one gave her another piece of the puzzle. Glimpses of ritual, of preparation, of intent. But the details remained fragmented. She needed more. And then, sudden cold. The tether snapped. Alice woke with a gasp, heart hammering, drenched in cold sweat. The familiar weight of her bedroom pressed down around her, shadows long in the corners, the faint hum of the city beyond her window. But the memory of the dream clung sharp and vivid, more real than waking. She sat up, mind racing. A key, a van, a ritual space beneath the city. She didn't know where, not yet. But now she knew the truth. Jessica Harper had not been taken by chance. She had been selected, chosen by a group that believed they served something far older, far darker than the law of men. Alice checked the clock. 4:13 a.m. Too early to call the station, but she couldn't waste time. She padded quietly down the hall, checked in on Ethan, still sleeping, safe, then poured herself a cup of black coffee, fingers trembling against the mug. She began writing every detail, every image, every sound. The ritual words still echoed in her skull: offering, vessel, fulfilled. The case had shifted. This wasn't just a missing child. By the time dawn broke over Halcroft City, the rain had faded to a dull mist. The streets shimmered with puddles, neon signs blinking against a sky still heavy with storm clouds. Alice arrived at the precinct well before shift change, hair damp, coat heavy with moisture. She had barely slept after the dream, her mind trapped in restless circles of thought. The images of the masked figure, the blade, the stone chamber, they replayed behind her eyes every time she blinked. Captain Ramirez met her at the front desk, already briefed by her early morning message. He didn't ask how she knew what she knew. He never did. He simply trusted her results, even if he could never explain them to anyone else. "There's more to this," Alice told him quietly. "The girl wasn't just taken. This is ritual, a group, not just one person. Organized believers." Ramirez's face darkened. "You're sure?" She nodded. "All right," he said, voice grim. "I'll have Vice and gang units put out feelers. Maybe someone's heard whispers. Meanwhile, T, you work your angle." He left her in the squad room with a stack of case files and a map of the city. Alice sifted through the paperwork methodically, but her mind remained fixed on the van from the dream. The route, the buildings it passed, the narrow curve of the road beneath rusted metal signs. She could still see it. It wasn't far from the industrial district east of the river, an area pockmarked with abandoned factories and subterranean access tunnels built during the city's expansion in the 1940s, most long forgotten. She scanned old zoning maps, tracing the routes that matched her vision. 3 potential areas stood out. One in particular, an old textile mill shuttered decades ago, had a basement level that connected to disused storm tunnels. The perfect place for shadows to gather unseen. She gathered her notes, checked her service weapon, and left a message with Ramirez. Then she drove. The textile mill loomed like a skeleton at the edge of the district, windows shattered, brickwork crumbling. Graffiti covered its lower walls, old symbols, tags from local gangs. But beneath them, older markings had been etched into the stone, worn smooth by time. Alice recognized some from her dream. Her breath caught. The front doors hung ajar. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and cold earth. Her footsteps echoed through vast, empty halls, broken machinery rusting in the corners. But it was the smell that guided her, faint, metallic, tinged with incense. She found the stairwell hidden behind a collapsed section of wall. Old, narrow steps descended into darkness. Drawing her flashlight, she moved carefully downward, gun ready, breath steady. The passage twisted and dropped deeper than she expected. Below, even the original foundation. At the bottom, she found a heavy iron door, partially open. Beyond it, the chamber from her dream. The air here was colder. The stone walls were slick with damp. Dozens of candles guttered in iron holders, casting long, shivering shadows. Strange symbols circled the floor, fresh, dark, drawn with intent. And in the center, the platform remained, empty for now. No sign of Jessica, No sign of the masked figure or the others, but they would return soon. Alice's heart pounded. She took photos quickly, every mark, every angle, documenting the scene before withdrawing. She couldn't take the place alone, not without backup. But now she had proof. Now she had a lead. Back at the precinct, she met again with Ramirez, showing him the images. "This is bigger than we thought," she told him. "Occult, ritualistic, active. They're preparing something. The girl is alive. For now. But we're running out of time." Ramirez rubbed his jaw, tension bleeding through his usually calm demeanor. "We'll get a warrant. Task force can hit it tonight." Alice hesitated. "We may not have that long. The dream. There's something coming. I could feel it." Ramirez studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. We'll move faster." That night, Alice tried again to sleep, to push herself back into the dream space to find more. It wasn't always reliable. Sometimes the visions came. Sometimes they didn't. But she had to try. She drank bitter black tea, sat in the dark, let exhaustion wash over her. And at last, her mind slipped free. This time, she was pulled deep into the mind of a new host, one of the robed acolytes, a woman, breathing fast, heart racing with anticipation. The ritual was close now. The chamber below had been prepared, the circle drawn. The vessel, Jessica, had been brought to the place and lay drugged upon the stone platform. Around the circle, robed figures gathered, candles lit. The masked leader stood at the head, blade in hand. A low chant began, words in a language not spoken by modern tongues. Old, primal, meant to pierce the veil between worlds. And then, a new voice. "You will not interfere." Alice's dream self froze. The voice had not come from the host, Aka. It had come from beyond. From the very shadows of the dream space. A presence aware of her intrusion. The vision shook. Shadows lengthened. Faces blurred. The tether strained. "You see too much," the voice whispered. "You will break." Pain lanced through her skull. The dream collapsed. Alice woke with a choked scream, clutching her head. Sweat pouring from her skin. But through the pain, she remembered. Jessica was alive. The ritual was set for tonight. Time was running out. The hours that followed were a blur of motion and voices. Alice barely remembered the drive to the precinct. The sharp words exchange with Ramirez, the hurried assembly of the task force. What burned behind her eyes was the image from the dream. Jessica Harper, pale and still atop the ritual platform, candles flickering in the shadows. The words of the masked figure rang in her ears. Tonight, there was no more time for bureaucracy. No more time for caution. By midnight, 3 unmarked cars and a tactical van moved through the Eastern District, engines low, lights off. The industrial ruins loomed in the mist. Rust and stone cloaked in darkness. Inside the lead vehicle, Alice sat with Ramirez and 2 officers from the Special Crimes Unit. Her hands trembled on her lap, but her mind was sharp. The visions had shown her too much to doubt. This was the place. This was the night. As they neared the textile mill, Ramirez glanced at her. "You ready?" Alice nodded. "We don't wait. The girl's alive. If they start the ritual, we may lose her." The captain gave the signal. The vehicles stopped. Officers moved in silence, weapons drawn. The iron doors of the old mill creaked under their weight. The scent of incense thick in the air. Stronger now, more bitter. Beneath it, the faintest trace of old blood. Inside, the building was cold as a tomb. Shadows flickered in the corners. Somewhere below, voices echoed, rhythmic, low, chanting. Alice led the way to the stairwell, every step matching the path from her dream. The door at the bottom stood half open, light spilling through, and then the chanting grew louder. The chamber was alive with movement. A dozen robed figures stood in a wide circle, arms raised, voices rising and falling in ancient cadence. At the center, on the stone platform, Jessica lay motionless, eyes half open, drugged into stillness. Her small frame was surrounded by burning candles and strange symbols drawn in dark red across the floor. At the head of the circle, the masked figure stood, tall, unmoving, ceremonial blade in hand. The voice behind the mask echoed through the chamber. "Let the vessel be prepared. Let the old words be fulfilled," Ramirez whispered behind Alice. "On your mark." But something stopped her, a cold pressure in her skull, the same presence that had pushed back in her dream. It was here, watching. "You cannot stop this," the voice whispered in her mind. "You see too much." Alice forced the words away. There was no time, no fear. She raised her weapon, shouted, "Howcroft, PD. Step away, now." The chanting faltered. Some figures turned, startled. The masked leader remained still. And then everything moved at once. Some acolytes fled toward the tunnels. Others lunged toward the intruders. The masked figure raised the blade high above Jessica. Alice fired. The shot echoed through stone. The blade clattered to the floor. Ramirez and the task force surged forward, subduing the remaining cultists with brutal efficiency. Screams echoed. Smoke thickened. The leader tried to flee, but Alice caught them before the stairs, tackled them hard against the stone. The mask cracked on the floor, revealing a face, gaunt, pale eyes, burning with fanatic light. Lips moved silently, still whispering old words. But the ritual had been broken, the circle undone. Jessica still breathed, alive. Later, as dawn crept through the city's skyline, the chamber stood empty. The child was safe in medical care, the cultists in custody. The masked leader, now silent, refused to speak. But something in their eyes told Alice this was not over. Ramirez stood beside her in the gray morning light, the weight of the night sinking in. "You did it," he said. "You saved her." Alice shook her head slowly. "For now." But this was just one circle, one night. She looked at the symbols on the walls, old, deeper than paint, words meant to linger. And somewhere beneath it all, the echo of that voice still whispered, "You see too much." Days passed. The official report called it a successful rescue operation. The abduction of Jessica Harper, the dismantling of a dangerous cult, the prevention of a ritualistic homicide. Commendations were issued, photographs taken. The press hailed the Howcroft PD's swift action. For the public, it was a closed case. For the department, another victory on the record. But for Alice Preston, it was far from over. The captured cultist said little, even under pressure. The masked leader, identified as a man named Gregory Ames, a former history professor turned recluse, refused to speak at all. No lawyer, no statement. Just a silent stare whenever Alice entered the room. Eyes sharp and knowing. A faint smirk on thin lips. The others repeated fragments over and over. The vessel was taken too soon. The circle remains. Ramirez wanted to close the book. The captain had seen enough of the old horrors the city hid. But Alice couldn't let it go. Not yet. The dreams returned. Each night, after checking in on Ethan, after locking the doors and shutting out the city's endless noise, Alice would lie awake too long, then finally fall into uneasy sleep. And there in that space between waking and dream, the voices whispered, "You see too much." Visions of other places now intruded. Rooms she didn't know, faces she hadn't seen. Other circles, other cities. Like ripples moving outward from a single stone dropped into deep water. This cult had been no isolated cell. It was part of something larger, something older than the broken bricks of the textile mill, older even than the streets of Howcroft itself. She began to search the archives, old cases of missing children, unexplained disappearances, strange symbols left behind. Patterns began to emerge. Cities where similar groups had appeared, decades apart, always following the same ritual, always seeking a vessel, always preparing. She read until her eyes ached, skimmed police reports from the 50s, 30s, even older. The words changed, the names changed. The names changed, but the meaning remained, a circle unbroken. One rainy night, a week after the raid, Alice dreamed again. She knew before she drifted under, the pressure building in her skull, the cold rising in her veins. This was not just her ability pulling her into memory. Something was calling her back. She stood in darkness. Not the ritual chamber, but somewhere deeper. A stone corridor lit only by a faint glow ahead. Footsteps echoed behind her, though she could see no one. The air was thick, heavy with incense and dust. And then a figure, tall, cloaked, masked, not in wood, but in something older, bone, polished and cracked by age. Hollow eyes burned faintly. When the figure spoke, the voice echoed through the stone. You have seen too much. You walk where you should not. There are circles beyond your reach, detective. Beyond your mind. Alice tried to pull away, to wake, to break the tether. But the figure raised a hand, and her body froze. Not by force of strength, but of will. One vessel saved means nothing. The circle remains, and you are marked now. A sharp pain lanced through her chest. A mark, burning cold, etched just above her heart. When she looked down, she saw the outline of a circle, simple but ancient. You will dream again, the voice whispered. You will see again, and one night, ... you will not wake. Alice gasped, awake in her bed, heart hammering, drenched in cold sweat. Her shirt clung to her skin. Pulling it aside, she saw no wound, no mark, but the phantom sensation burned still beneath her ribs. She rose, checked on Ethan, safe, still sleeping. Then stood alone in the dark kitchen, breath slow and ragged. This wasn't over, not by far. Somewhere out there, the circles remained. Others would take up the chant. Others would seek the vessel. And Alice Preston, detective, mother, dreamwalker, would follow. Whether she chose to or not. Because now the dreams would never stop.